Ironhide released an update for Starving Hollow to address the feedback they received about the design of this stage. So in this video, I want to talk about those changes and their impact on the game. But first, I want to discuss what these actions say about Ironhide and Alliance overall. In all my time in this community, the only time I can recall Ironhide ever changing the waves on the level were the original Flash versions of Dark Tower and Serogaz's Lair. I believe the reason for those changes were because they originally believed each of those levels would be the final stage of Kingdom Rush, so they were trying to go out with a bang by spawning a bit of everything. Then they realized that they had more to create with this series, so they made the waves spawn enemies that made more sense for the environment they were in. It also probably has something to do with the way that enemies are coded in these games. You need to load new assets from each environment that an enemy is introduced in. So if you're spawning ogres in Dark Tower, you need to load the entire asset sheet from the forest environment, which is just inefficient. All of this is to say that the reasons for reworking these levels were pretty straightforward and simple. Since then, Ironhide has never reworked a stage for the past 13 years, until now. The very fact that they reworked Starving Hollow says a lot about what Ironhide wants with Alliance and its company image. For one, it tells me that Alliance is here to stay. This is the present and future of Ironhide games, and they will tend to this game to make sure that it lives up to the ideal that they have for it. If you want Ironhide content, it's going to be found in Alliance, and it's going to be that way for at least a very long while. In other words, there's no ignoring Alliance if you're in the Kingdom Rush community. It was easier to ignore Vengeance because it was coexisting with the other 3 Kingdom Rush games and their updates, and the Revengeance mod that reworked it. But now, the way I expect things to go is Alliance, Alliance, and more Alliance. There are no roadmaps for any other games, and this game is being cared for so much that it will even have resources dedicated to improving its already existing content. On top of that, I was completely wrong about the breakneck pace of the content updates for this game. I thought that Ironhide was on a mission to fill the game with as many levels as possible, just to nullify the negative reviews that were saying that the game was too short and lacked content. In reality, they actually went back and changed the mechanic I criticized in my Starving Hollow video. This takes me to the conclusion that Ironhide is hoping for its treatment of Alliance to be representative of its relationship with fans. They want you to know that they are listening to your feedback and actually doing something with it. How well they are listening is another matter though. In my video explaining my issues with Starving Hollow, I listed 3 ways in which they could make the content updates the best that they could be, generally speaking. When applied to Starving Hollow, that would be to give towers more of a role, do away with RNG mechanics, and to fix bugs with the game. A 4th unstated note would be to not have unskippable cutscenes, but take that as given. I decided to revisit the level to see what new changes it had and how closely Ironhide followed my specific feedback. From what I know, the only other negative feedback people have for the level is that winged crocs are OP and take away from the rest of the enemies. Nobody else has said that the level is designed poorly in any ways other than my criticism, at least to my knowledge. So for now, I can only assume that these changes are an indirect response to my specific feedback. Right away, the unskippable cutscene showcases that Abominator will target the tower, and rather than remove it completely, it turns into rubble that can be repaired for 220 gold. What's fascinating about this is that the mechanic somehow manages to maintain all 3 of the problems I listed out in my video. First, the targeting is still random, so that fails point 2. Speaking of point 2, I heard that Ironhide wanted to make the targeting algorithmic instead of random, and that they wanted to remove the RNG if they could ever revisit it. So I find it odd that Ironhide went through the trouble of reworking the mechanic and even redoing the waves of the level, but didn't bother removing the RNG of the targeting. I find it more believable that they think the RNG does have actual merits for the game design, so I'll adjust that point later. Second, this rework changes up the tower meta even less than before. Primarily, low-level towers are still bad. They are still ineffective in terms of cost, space, and utility compared to high-level towers. If you wanted to design a level that makes the low-level towers less bad, the original Starving Hollow was at least a way to do that. However, the real solution would just be to buff low-level towers rather than forcing players to play against RNG in a strategy game. Going back to feedback I've never seen before, I don't know a soul who prefers low-level towers to be less efficient than the high tiers. The whole point of high-tier towers is that they have space efficiency and can use abilities that change the stage in more ways than simple stat increases can. Giving them cost and damage efficiency as well just makes the level and the game overall into somewhat of a mono strategy. Now that high-level towers are punished less by the mechanic, the tower balance isn't changed at all. I don't want to make it sound like Alliance can't win here. I literally said that rebalancing the low-level towers is a viable option, and considering the work Ironhide is willing to put into this game, it's a pipe dream of mine that this can still happen. As it is right now, the strategy of this game is still to always rush a tier 4 tower as soon as possible, so the depth of thinking is still lower than the trilogy, generally speaking. Third, the Rubble now introduces new bugs, such as Tri-Cannon being able to shoot bombardment even while needing repair. On top of that, the arcane pillars just don't work sometimes, even though I know for a fact that they work on every enemy, including mini-bosses. Going back to RNG, I think the number one problem that I faced when playing this level for the first time, as well as in my revisit, is that it's not as fun to learn this game as it was the other games. I noticed this reaction from Coziness and RCCH as well. The former was willing to learn Kingdom Rush 1 a second whole time under his own rule set, champion difficulty. And yet, shortly after streaming that, Alliance didn't make him excited to keep going. While I didn't feel such a lack of excitement going through the majority of the game myself, RNG was a deal breaker for me. I don't like testing out a strategy only for it to fail due to a bug with Arcane Pillars, and then retry the stage and see the strategy fail this time without the bug, all because of the variance between runs that occurs with the tower disable. Even if you can buy the tower back now, the fact that it gets disabled for several seconds during the animation can screw up your defense pretty significantly. The way I see it, RNG is fun to deal with once your baseline strategy is already concrete, because then you can adapt it to the unpredictable things that happen next. As you actively form your strategy though, it's much more annoying to determine whether or not it's working. I can only speak for myself here, but I found the process of learning this level to be draining on both versions. I think that the wave design itself is superb in this stage. The difficulty is high, the enemies spawn in ways that make you think strategically, with the biggest highlight being the lizard shots that spawn with the Hydra to make you balance between AoE, stall, and high DPS all at the same time. The boss is unforgettable. All these things make for the best of what Kingdom Rush has to offer, and while I stand by my criticism of the level, none of this would have made the old me feel as drained playing the stage as I did. But I was drained, that's a fact. It's my theory that I am just going through a period where I've played so many tower defense games that I don't feel intrinsically motivated to keep doing any more for the time being. I'm having way more fun with game design, working on mods for the Kingdom Rush games, and playtesting the Legends of Kingdom Rush mods. So, I believe that my criticism is more harsh than it otherwise would be, simply because I don't feel as patient with these games right now. I take back what I said about Alliance not having any strategy to it, and what I said about Ironhide going too fast to give each individual piece of content enough time to be good. Clearly, there is strategy to this game. I just feel too drained to solve it. Clearly, they are putting in time to make the content good. I just am numb to it. So, for the time being, I'll go and live my best life, and I'll see everyone later when I have more passion to share. Take care, everyone.